Hi everyone. If you joined us a minute ago, apologies for that. Something weird was going on with the sound. We don't know what, but hopefully we are all better now that we've done a restart. So thanks for joining us today, and we are here to talk about the classics for this month's genre talk. Sorry we missed you last month. We had a bit of a medical issue, which I'm sure Alina will describe in a moment for you. But we will come back and we will come back and do those mystery and thriller ones next month. We'll tie it all in with horror for October for you. So just to do a brief intro in case you're new here, my name is Nicki. I'm an author and editor. Post videos here on YouTube about editing, writing, reading, all the other sort of things I love. So I'll let Alina introduce herself and then we'll kick off.
Okay, great. Hi, everyone. First of all, apologies that I seemed so out of it at the end of this. I was actually checking our sound on the main video on the YouTube side, and because sound was coming to me from every angle, I was like, I'm going to be quiet now. So my name is Alina. I'm a fiction writer. I'm from Romania, and the medical reason why we postponed the stream was that not the day before, 2 days before the stream, I broke my leg. So the moment they, moved me to the room where I stayed and waited until they performed surgery and stuff, I was texting Nicki saying, "Oh, sorry, I have bad news. We can't do the stream. I broke my leg." So yeah, that was fun. It's why I have this very enticing background of my pillows and the white wall. It's because I can't do much other than hop around, which today proved extremely difficult to do. In between here and where my books are, it's 5 steps for a normal person. But going there and back in a walker while carrying books was fun. So fun. And I was looking at the shelves and I was like, I'm so glad I don't have my classics here. Just a few of them. Like, otherwise I would have been here and for like the rest of the next week. So that's why we delayed last month's stream. And hopefully we don't get to do that again, because I've had enough medical issues for the entire year. Thank you very much. It's fine. But yeah. So how have you been, Nicki? I feel like it's been so long.
I think.
Yeah, well. It's fine. I'm fine.
Doing our litany of injuries, I then stubbed my foot on the bedpost on Friday, and I've got 2 swollen toes still. Luckily, not a break like Alina. But we're both hobbling around a bit. But at least we're sitting down now to talk to you all.
Yes.
So
yes, that's awesome.
So we're talking classics anyway today, as I said. Obviously, Lena and I don't write classics because we went alive 100 years ago. At least that's what we like to pretend anyway. We're not that old. So what we thought we'd talk about today is we'll talk a bit about our favourite classics, obviously adaptations, but then we'll also look at some of the trends with the classics that have been happening in recent years. So things like the Pride and Prejudice and zombies kind of things that have been going on. So
and all the retellings in space.
Yes. Yep, exactly.
Which I have thoughts on.
So to kick us off, do you want to give us some just opening thoughts, Alina, on the classics? Do you like reading them? Do you have favourite authors? And do you have Romanian ones you want to share with us?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking about before the stream, and while we were talking about classics, is that my perspective on classics seemed very skewed to what I generally see as lists of classics you should read. First of all, they seem very English-centric to me. Most of the books are British authors, maybe some Irish, maybe some American, but there's rarely a lot of French authors or Spanish or German or Russian sometimes. That sometimes is included. Because I was born in Romania, which, small country, nobody cares about, nobody speaks Romanian outside of Romania, not much, unless they're expats. So, well, and Moldova, but that used to be part of Romania, so it doesn't count, I'm guessing. So the thing is, when we were discussing classics, first of all, Romanian classics, I think, I mean, I don't know exactly how to define a classic, because for some people, Lord of the Rings is a classic. For others, and I do not get that, Harry Potter is a classic. It's a great book. It's not a classic, but I think a lot of literature written before World War II in Romania is considered classic, maybe even after that, a bit, because let's face it, before the 1900s, there wasn't a lot of literature happening in Romania. There was some, not a lot. Just for reference, you know, when they were building the Empire State Building, and you saw that set of photos in early 1900s with people on top of a tall building. Yeah, we were chasing each other with axes and other such tools. There was a revolt of the peasants, and they used axes. Anyway. But there was a huge boom, a cultural boom post World War I. It's when we became a monarchy, and Romania and Bucharest in particular were a very strong cultural hub. So those are still classics. I did read a lot of classics in a lot of different literatures, like we read English classics because English class, French, Russian a bit, and a lot of Romanian classics. I have my favorites. I don't mind classics now. I still enjoy reading them. I don't necessarily go to classics as my first choice anymore, I think. But yeah, and we also, I mean, when you study humanities, you study something that's called international literature, universal literature, something like that. So that was a lot of classic heavy reading material that I had to go through. So I love Dostoevsky, for example. I do love Jane Austen. I'm not that well versed in the German classics. I think I have some Goethe, but that's about it. I'm trying to remember. And despite all this, despite all the emphasis they put on other countries and their literature, I think the huge majority of classics I've read are still English, because I've always been in English intensive classes. I don't know. It's been my path since 5th grade. So I did not read a lot of Shakespeare in English, though. I only read A Midsummer's Night Dream in the original language. It was fine, but I think I read everything else in Romanian, mostly because there was no access to them in English that easily. Now they're everywhere, like they're absolutely everywhere, which is awesome. And I used to have a couple in French, which I don't have here. They're in my mother's library. And those are the only 2 languages I read as an original, like French and English. That's it. The rest of them were Romanian translations, which prior to the revolution were great translations. After that, it just went downhill. So I'm sorry, it's true. Like it's true. I've seen some. I've seen some shit out there. No, it's scary. Maybe we should do an episode on that, on translation.
Yes,
at some point.
That would probably be quite good fun, I think. Yeah.
Oh yes, especially when you have a Turkish book that's been translated into Romanian from English.
Oh yes, double translations. Yeah.
Really nice pearls there. Or we can talk about the teenager who they decided was good enough to translate Harry Potter in Romanian at some point. Yes, just that bad, as you can imagine. So yeah, that's my experience with classics. I tend to like books that are not the most obvious. Like I like Persuasion a lot more than Pride and Prejudice.
Right. Yes. Yep.
Which is kind of weird. And yeah, I don't know. Do we consider Marquez to be a classic or not? Because in Romania it's considered a classic book, but
Which one, sorry?
Gabriel Garcia Marquez.
I call him modern classic, which I was going to sort of talk about in my section in a minute when I sort of pick up my thoughts and talk about, because what we're going to cover that a little bit more in our next or in the November stream. So
yeah, it would be more of a modern classic. It's piled up with the classics here a lot. Right. So that's why sometimes I'm really not sure. But for Romanian classics, one of my favorites is Mircea Eliade. And if the name seems familiar to anyone, it's probably because of his History of Religion books. It's a 3-volume book, which I know internationally was really well received and got great critiques and whatever. Reviews, I mean, not critiques. It was, I think, one of the first bigger published work on the history of religion. And yeah, I like his fiction a lot more, obviously, even if he was a bit of a misogynist, slightly, just a tiny bit, just a tiny bit. And he would be, I mean, you'd consider him more of a modern classic in international literature terms, but because he kind of wrote in between the wars and he left Romania because of the communist regime, he's kind of more viewed as a classic here. So yeah, and if I go really way back, like 1800s, it would be Mihai Eminescu, who is like the biggest poet in Romanian literature, and I completely adore him. And I would say Caragiale. He wrote plays mostly, but he was like part of the nobility, and he made a lot of fun of them. Like he would take the piss out of everyone and make them all look really, really stupid. So he was fun. And if we go into more of the folklore and traditional storytelling, it would be Ion Creangă, who was absolutely brilliant, also kind of insane on the side, I think. He wrote a storybook, like fairy tale kind of story. It was called The Story of the Penis. Only you wouldn't use penis there. Think of a
cruder term.
So, wonder why I like him, because he was insane, probably. But yeah, there were a lot of historical classics which I read, did not necessarily enjoy in Romanian literature because they were super descriptive and slow-paced. And after you read something like, I don't know, The Three Musketeers, or Winnetou or Vinnetou, as you want to read that, those seem kind of boring. And I have nothing to say on the love story angle of the classics because I never read that as a teenager. I read the spy novels, so I'm sorry. So that's a bit. And I think I enjoyed Madame Bovary, but I don't remember anything of it. So yeah.
So you've read more French than you think then, because you've read Dumas, Flaubert.
Oh yeah, I did read a lot of it, but most of it was in the first couple of years of high school, I think. So I forgot a lot of the details, I think. So yeah, that's it. Over to you, because I talked for like 20 minutes now.
Okay, well, I mean, just to let you all know that it could be worse than that in a second, because the only opening note I've written for myself on my sort of little jotty sheet here, ready for today, for my opening comments is gush with an exclamation mark. I mean, anyone who knows me, watches my channel, you know I'm a big fan of the classics. I had a little period in my mid-teens when I read nothing but classics for about 2 to 3 years. And which was great fun. And they used to have Penguin classics at the time. Actually, I've got one here. So here's Villette, Charlotte Bronte's Villette as a Penguin classic. And they used to sell these 6 for £5 in my local bookshop in England. So I just spent 3 years thinking that all books cost about £1. And then I had to...
You should like this though. These are
Dubliners,
really... Yeah, the Wordsworth classics are really easy to find.
They're good prices too, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, I've always read them. I've obviously read them from about the age 13 or so, mainly because for my 12th birthday, we went to see the musical of Les Miserables. And I came back and wanted to read the book. So I read that at about age 13, I think. I was a bit precocious. And
I gave up. I read it at about the same age. I gave up.
There we go. Good. And I just read nothing but classics for ages. I've always loved them. When we did them, when we sort of got to high school and we're doing them through high school, university, I was the one who was always happy to be reading them, unlike half the class who were groaning and doing anything they could to avoid it. So I was interested to see what you had to say, Alina, about where we're cutting off classics. And I think for me, I kind of think, to my mind, classics is up to the end of the Victorian. And once you get into Edwardian, so E.M. Forster type, then I'd start calling it modern classics. So the James Joyce you had there, I'd call a modern classic. Even though now it's nearly 100 years now, but
it's in the classics collection, in the modern classics collection. By the way, that's why it's kind of like everybody has their own definition of it.
Yes.
So it's kind of like
I always go just for the end of Victorian, pretty much 1900, and I go, that's my cutoff, 1900, and then it's modern classic. But you see, I would never call Harry Potter a classic.
Yeah.
Not in the sense I'm using the word classic. You know, maybe it's a classic of children's literature these days, but not a classic classic.
No, I agree with you. I would, if I would go like further in time, I would probably include the modern classics, but then stop.
So, I mean, in terms of authors, I mean, as you say, that you do tend to get a lot of English language, particularly within England, but also, of course, the Americans. So I've obviously read a lot of those. I do enjoy Austen, obviously, the Brontes, Thomas Hardy. Dickens, I've come to love Dickens a little bit more. When I first read him, I didn't enjoy him 100%. And I tended to prefer Thomas Hardy. And I always think of them as kind of similar. It's just like Dickens is in the city and Hardy's in the country. But their style of writing and their approach to character was fairly similar. So, and I always got on much better with Thomas Hardy. But having come back to Dickens more recently as an adult, I do find I like it a bit more. I kind of appreciate his style a little bit more than I did back then. I do like, I enjoy the 18th century as well. I mean, a lot of the big names that we think of, like Dickens and Austen, they're all 19th century Victorian authors, essentially, or Renaissance into Victorian. But I do enjoy the Georgian era authors too. So people like Radcliffe, who was writing the great Gothic romances that were really popular in that period, Richardson, and works like Liaison Dangereuse, also from that period. A lot of epistolary novels from that time as well. But coming into the Victorian again, I guess, as you say, you don't tend, there are some countries you don't hear as much from. I mean, in Spain, I know Lope de Vega and I know Cervantes, and that's about it.
Yeah, I can't think I read as well.
Yeah, I can't think of any others from that kind of period that I know. Italy, I tend to know older, so medieval, Renaissance, not so much in that sort of romantic period. Obviously, Russian, Dostoevsky is my favorite, but I do like the Russian school. I love how bleak they are. And once you got used to the names, because I think that catches people out sometimes who don't understand the Russian naming system, and then they all throw in pet names and it does get a bit confusing. But once you've got your head around that, I do enjoy a bit of Tolstoy and the like. In terms of the French, I mean, I'm a huge fan of Victor Hugo. Love Victor Hugo. I like Dumas as well. Who else in the French?
I lived for Dumas.
Flaubert.
Absolutely.
And some of the others I like in the French we'll probably talk about more when we do November, because in November we're doing modern classics and literary fiction. So we're bringing a few people like Baudelaire and that then, I guess.
Yep.
The German, as you say, the German I tend not to know so much either. More poets than fiction, prose authors. So Schiller and Heine, I've got some books on. I do like Heine. In his old, like more fairy stuff than the, not using fairy in a derogative term, but sort of mystical kind of stuff as opposed to the political writings of later. But the only one I think I've really read a lot is Goethe. So I would like to try to read a bit more from Germany and the like. So, but yeah, I mean, I love them, and I do come back to them. I'm actually sitting there at the moment. I'm reading Njál's saga, the Icelandic saga at the moment. But once I finish that, I've got a Dostoevsky that I haven't read yet to do. So I do make them part of my yearly reading, because although I've read loads, there's always ones I haven't come across. And I recently found there's a whole load of Dumas I hadn't read. So I am going to try and go back and do some more of that.
There are quite a few.
Yeah, I've read all the big famous ones. But some of those other, some of the continuation with the D'Artagnan characters, the Three Musketeer characters, I haven't read. Yeah. So I do want to try some of those.
There's something with a Vicomte, I think. I don't remember.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
Those I did. I started them, but I didn't finish them because the boys in my class gave up on them. They discovered like SAS spies and whatever. So yeah, I was kind of like, oh, shiny, that's cool, shiny and stuff.
I do. The thing I also find fascinating about the classics is how much it tells you about social opinions, moral opinions of morality, if you like, of the periods. So I mean, I just grabbed a few examples, like just randomly off my shelf here, but I noticed I've got John Cleland's Fanny Hill. I don't know if you've read that one, Alina.
No.
Memoirs of a Woman of Pleasure, with illustrations, which I won't show because they're rude.
I want to read Manolesco a lot, and I still haven't managed to. My boyfriend read it, which is like weird. I think it's the only classic he ever read, and I haven't. So I know it was referenced a lot in Dumas, the Sun's book, which I can't remember the title now. By the way, my mind is frazzled. If I don't remember really obvious things, it's because I've been like that lately. So yeah.
But you take.
I can remember. I can remember the title in Romanian, but that's all. It's fine.
So I mean,
it's the one that they made the opera after.
Yeah, I know the one, and I can't think of the title at the moment either. But I know exactly which one you mean.
Yeah, that one. Sorry.
Anyway, so John Cleland, anyway, Fanny Hill is 18th century. Yeah. Take all the 18th century books: Marquis de Sade, Samuel Richardson, John Cleland, and what do they all have in common? Sex. Tons and tons
all of them.
Sex, all over the place.
Yep.
But then you move into the Victorian era, and of course, the sex is gone. And we all have to have perfect Jane Austen manners.
Right.
So, and I find that quite interesting as well as what light it sheds on the different periods, and that the things that were perfectly acceptable in 1760 by 1830 are frowned upon. So I do enjoy the classics for that manner as well, just to think of them as historical works and what they say about the period and how people were living and things like that. So
speaking of morals, I have this one here. Which is good.
Elective affinities. Is it?
Yeah, that one, which is so not about sex, but deep down it is. Because I mean, that was that weird part at the end where the child looked like the man she loved out of the blue, despite her never doing anything with that guy. Never. Also, I just wanted to show you my Crime and Punishment copy, which is like absolutely huge.
It's really huge. Because I mean, Crime and Punishment
this is the font.
Yeah.
Oh, music sheet. Okay. I'm trying to see if there are a lot of notes. They start. Okay, wait. So these are notes.
Okay.
And all of these is the book.
That seems really hefty because my copy is only about, you know, this thick, maybe 1.5 centimeters or something.
Yeah, it's kind of, I mean,
quite squat.
A normal book. It's kind of short, like
right.
But still, it's got 630 pages. I think it's because in Romanian, it tends to get longer.
Okay, it takes longer to say the same thing.
Yeah, I've noticed this when I was doing translations from English to Romanian, that the Romanian text would be like a bit longer, and it might be that.
So we don't want to look at Ulysses in Romanian then. War and Peace.
Oh yeah. The Karamazov Brothers is in 2 volumes.
Oh, yes.
Both,
yeah,
both
right.
Yeah, and that's hefty. I'm not sure if you can see here, but we use like something that looks like an ellipsis for a dialogue.
Oh, yes. Right.
Yep. This is what we use. So it was a huge kind of crossover for me when I started reading books in English and French because they didn't have the same punctuation. Yes. So yeah,
and even when you go somewhere like Spain and they have the quote marks up and down, do you know what I mean? Whereas we have them all at the top in English. So yeah, it's just getting used to it. I mean, in terms of reading in foreign languages, French and German I will read in the original, but Italian, it depends on the book, whether I feel like tackling it in terms of classics. But certainly the French and German, I do enjoy getting some Victor Hugo in particular in the original. And I recently read L'Homme qui rit, The Man Who Laughs in English. And perhaps we'll just have a brief talk about translation. We might come back and do a whole thing on it because that might be quite fun. But I mean, sometimes it's quite hard to get foreign classics, even in print, like regardless of what you're willing to pay. They just some of the less known ones just aren't brought out. And the only place you can get them is somewhere like Project Gutenberg, which is fine, except you don't know who the translation is, who did it, and you don't know. Usually they're Victorian, and sometimes they're a little bit awful. And this translation of L'Homme qui rit that I got from Project Gutenberg, I could tell it wasn't a good translation just because I've read Victor Hugo in the original French a lot, and it didn't feel right. You know, it kind of felt clunky and awkward. And I was like, I'm pretty sure that this is just the translation and not the book. So I do want to get a French copy eventually and read it again. But it does make a difference, I think. You have to have a good translation. I do like to know, if possible, I like a book to tell me who the translator is. I like to have a name so that I feel that it was someone like worthwhile and not that they just grabbed anyone off the street to do it, you know. But as you say, that might be an interesting, like, longer discussion for another time. So, leave it
by the way, small interruption, because I had to check what this is. It's something. It's a sheet I ripped from an old music notebook. We had those in school, and I want to show people what highlighting quotes in your Kindle and having them saved looked like before the internet. I was just writing down quotes while reading Crime and Punishment, and here I have something from novella collection from Gogol.
Yes.
So yeah, that's how it was done. This was like unusual for me. I had special notebooks for them. For quotes I found interesting, and I found interesting the most weird stuff now that I look at it. Okay, great job, Alina.
Moving us along then, do you want to have a talk about maybe adaptations first before we move into the sort of weirder stuff that's been going on with these books lately, just in terms of more traditional film, TV, theatre adaptations? Are there any that you particularly love, anything you think was awful and didn't work?
I loved everything Jane Austen a lot more on film than in the books.
Right.
That's true. Because I had access to the movies in English before I had access to the books in English. And I don't know, it was more atmospheric. I don't think I had a really great idea about fashion in that period, not a lot before high school. And yeah, I don't know. It was like seeing movies and plays, a lot of Shakespeare plays actually, even if they were in Romanian, because of the costumes and everything. You had a better idea of how it all looked, because this was still kind of pre-internet. Like my first couple of years of high school, the internet was not so prevalent, let's say, and where it was available. I think I started going to internet cafes in 10th grade, so my second year of high school. It was still kind of dial-up speed, so and we had no idea what to do with the internet other than enter chat rooms and play games. So yeah, that was the first visual image that I got of the books I was reading, because I could imagine stuff. I was better at imagining the medieval stuff than the more recent ones, because there were movies with like the whole Versailles atmosphere and the big dresses and the big wigs and everything. So I had some idea of those because the Musketeers, the movies were like more popular. Even before the revolution, we could get some French movies sometimes, rarely, very rarely, not a lot. Capitalism bad for communism, so we're not showing it. But if it was a medieval story, they might have shown it. So that was very interesting to me. Now that I'm an adult, I appreciate the possibility of reading the books in their original language. And I've been appreciating that since like university, when I could get access to them. But before that, before they were prevalent and you could find them in most larger bookstores, all these adaptations meant a lot for me because of the visuals and the information they added. Of course, later on, I understood that some of them had, let's say, not the best costumes or not the best dresses. They weren't always period appropriate, and some things were just made up. But compared to nothing, that was an improvement for me. So I think that's why I have a fondness for certain adaptations. I don't like it when they take a lot of liberties with them. When they change the story, I get annoyed. So if they keep the like the structure of the story, and if the characters do what they're supposed to be doing, I don't care that they're modernized. But when they take liberties and go in crazy places, meh, not my cup of tea. Not my cup of tea, because that's not how it was supposed to happen. Like, it's different in the book. That never happened in the book. But I think that's just one of the issues I have with Hollywood in general and how they decide to do movies, because they do it to more recent books as well. I mean, they did it to Anne Rice's second and third book, which they merged into one movie that has nothing to do with the books, nothing. Imagine my shock, because I saw the movie before I read books 2 and 3.
Right.
So I was like, this is so much better. Why did they have to go that way? By the way, just a small explanation for that. This was pre-Kindle, 1. And 2, in Romania, translations happen for newer stuff like this. Blockbuster movie gets made, we translate the book. It's how I read Interview with the Vampire. Queen of the Damned, not the most successful movie, wasn't brought to the Romanian cinemas, no translation. And they took their sweet time getting books 2, 3, and whatever else she published out. So yeah, It was weird. I first stopped at book 1. So yeah, that's my take on them. I have favorites, and I mean, it's very important when there's an adaptation of something that you find the actors appealing.
Yes. Yeah.
And that their chemistry is there. Because if it's not, it just doesn't work that well.
Yeah, I mean, I'd agree. I mean, the BBC obviously have a pretty good track record of doing the adaptations of the Jane Austens and the like.
Yeah.
I mean, the BBC Pride and Prejudice will always be my favourite. I do think that.
Which one is that?
That's the Colin Firth. The Colin Firth one from the mid-90s. 6 parts, I think it was.
I think I've seen that. I think I've seen that on TV at some point.
That for me will always be the best one. I mean, that added him going swimming in a lake just so he could see his shirt all wet, but that was a minor little thing, and otherwise it was a very reasonable adaptation.
That's acceptable fan service. That's how we call it.
I wasn't as fussed about the Keira Knightley film version, but what's funny is that little scene with the lake. It's so iconic now. Everyone knows it, even if you don't like Jane Austen, even if you haven't seen the entire thing, everyone's aware of that scene. And there was a period in England where they used to use it in adverts. And like, he comes out the lake and he meets Elizabeth Bennet, and they have this moment when they're like, you know, Miss Bennet, Mr. Darcy, you know, and they did this for an ad about paying a bill. I think it was paying his TV license. You know, what are you doing? Well, I'm off to pay my TV license kind of thing. I can't remember the exact ad, but they did use it, and they just dubbed over the voices and made it this advert about going to pay his bill. And it's so well known that everyone got that and like, you know, understood it. So
Jesus.
I did love that. They did an excellent Daniel Deronda with Hugh Dancy. That's going back a few years now, but that was brilliant. The one that I think really they ought to stop filming, because I actually think it's unfilmable, is Wuthering Heights. There have been so many attempts at Wuthering Heights, films, TV, and none of them, some of them have had good bits, but none of them completely got it right. And I think the trouble is the way it's written. There's a lot of narrators, all of whom are completely unreliable. No, there's not one reliable narrator in that book. So to try and film it, it just doesn't work. And you see some really bizarre versions, like where they can just do half the story. And they did a recent film version. Well, I'll say recent, it's probably like coming up 10 years now or something, like 8 to 10 years, but recent to me. And I took Corey to see it, my husband, and he will watch a few classics with me, and some of them he likes, but he was a little bit on the fence about this. And I said, no, Wuthering Heights, it's awesome, it's so great. And even I sat there and was like looking at my watch going, is this ever going to end? It was so bad. And I think it was like 20, I think it was like 2012 or 2013 or something. So probably about 5 years, but
not
it
sure.
was awful.
No, I don't. I've seen Jane Eyre. I've seen Jane Eyre. That I've seen.
Yes,
and I do like that as a movie adaptation.
I've seen there are a few good Jane Eyres around, and again, there's sometimes bits they miss. I mean, the Michael Fassbender and Mia Wasikowska, I really like. It does miss the gypsy scene, which I do love the gypsy scene, but I didn't mind that it was out, because I can look at Michael Fassbender as Mr. Rochester for however long, it's fine. So gypsy scene or not, there have been some other good Jane Eyres. The ones that I think do well as well are the French adaptations of their own books, because they take it really seriously. And if you look, there's a really hideously appalling film version of Les Miserables starring Liam Neeson. And it is.
Yes, I know.
It just like takes it and just like rips it apart. And
was it kind of did it turn into a like action movie, or? Yeah,
it was just weird, and like characters that were really important just like vaguely appeared and did nothing, and it was just all that they were sort of promoting or highlighting all this stuff that wasn't important and just losing huge chunks of the story. It was just like made up its own mind. Like, it's just like, we're just going to take the book and just like take the character names, and that's fine. That's as much as we need, you know. It was really bad, but they did a French TV version, 4 parts, starring Gerard Depardieu as Jean Valjean and John Malkovich as Javert. Perfect, really great. And the French, because they're so like protective of their literature and their language and everything, when they do adapt their work, they always do keep it really close. There's been a lot of good Victor Hugo French versions. There's a really good Count of Monte Cristo with Gerard Depardieu in French as well. And I do like that. I like their sort of policy on that, you know, it's sacred and we mustn't touch it, and we're going to put it on exactly as it is. And I understand there's some good Russian ones like that as well, because I find we don't get a lot of Russian adaptations. And when we do, they tend to be a little bit truncated in English. But I've seen a few notes. I was filming a video. I don't think it's been up yet, but for one of my crash course in the classics, I did Dostoevsky, filmed recently. I can't remember if it's live yet or if I've just uploaded it for a future month. Brain mush. But it's I was looking.
I think I've seen something about it. I think
maybe it was the last one that went live, and and for that I was researching some adaptations and things, because I thought, well, I usually recommend a few at the end of the video, and I hadn't really seen that many, and it looked from what I found that the Russian ones are considered better than when the English and Americans get hold of them. So that for me is quite important. As you say, I don't mind if they change things if it has to be changed for the sake of the different medium, but as much as possible I think they should stick. And I think it's hard because some people do get upset if the character isn't how they pictured, like they didn't picture that actor. But as you say, I think if the chemistry is there between the characters, particularly on the romantic plot lines, then even if it wasn't your first thought, you can sort of come to love them anyway. And I mean, for me, Colin Firth, Mr. Darcy will always look like Colin Firth, because that's the version, that 1995 version is the one that's like so in my head. So whenever I read Pride and Prejudice again, like it looks like Colin Firth. So Colin Firth just is Mr. Darcy, which is why it was then funny when he went and played Mark Darcy in Bridget Jones's Baby as well. Which is, of course, loosely based on the Pride and Prejudice idea anyway. So
I never thought of it like that.
Which probably brings us in quite nicely. Yeah, it probably brings us in quite nicely to this idea of adaptation in more extreme sense, where we're talking about how people are taking books now they're out of copyright and doing weird things with them.
Yep.
So, I mean, I actually don't own. I've seen the film of Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, which it's a bit of fun.
Oh, yes. It's on Netflix. You can watch it. I've rewatched it recently because it was recommended to me, and it's a fun movie.
Yeah,
it's fun. I like that one. I like the interpretation. I like how there was a difference between being trained in Japan and being trained in China.
Yes.
And I was just having so much fun because I was like, you'd all be dead anyway. But that's fine. I mean, who has time? I mean, to train in China, they made it seem like they were going, it almost sounded like, Roman noble children going to Greece to study. It was the same thing. Like, you can go there for a couple of years and turn back and be a master of all the Chinese arts and perfectly speak the language. But, it was still fun. It was a fun experience. I liked it. I really liked it. But it was a fun, entertaining movie. It wasn't like a piece of movie art that will forever be remembered as the best adaptation of Pride and Prejudice.
I kind of feel the books are like that as well. They're a bit of a laugh, but will they be remembered more than the originals in 100 years time? Probably not.
No. I mean, I like retellings, but I prefer fairy tale retellings or myths being retold. I prefer those because I don't know, I just do. I have recently read Alexa Dunn's Jane Eyre in Space, which is called Brightly Burning. Right. It's a sci-fi. She's a YouTuber here. It's traditionally published. I liked what she did. to stick to the spirit of the story. There were some changes, and it had to do with the mystery of who's hiding on the Rochester, which was a ship. There was this high society, which I thought was really nicely portrayed. The morals of the people living on these ships were really kind of the morals of Jane Eyre. And what's happening is that there's been like an ice age, and everybody boarded these huge ships, and they were living like near Earth. But what I need stuff to, I mean, this would be like a 3.5 read for me, which I didn't do a full review on yet because I feel bad because I thought I'd like it more than I did. I pre-ordered it, by the way. So yeah, I was enthusiastic about the idea. What I didn't like is that it's never explained. How do you get from Jane Eyre to modern times, and then even further into the future back to Jane Eyre morals? There's no explanation for that.
Right.
There's no explanation on a lot of things. Plus, they have this entire huge ship that's dedicated to grow food, and then all the poor people are on this ship. But then they seem pretty blasé about losing this entire ship, which has huge fields that need a lot of people to work them, which means no hydroponics.
Right.
Which means no hydroponics, which means no sane person would ever give up all those fields because they don't starve. Even if they move stuff on the other ship, on the other ships, it will never be enough. Especially without hydroponics, because if you have hydroponics, you don't need people to work the fields. So I don't need it to be hard sci-fi. I don't need it to be hard sci-fi. There's no doubt about that. I don't mind soft sci-fi, but it still needs to make sense. So that bit just kind of annoyed me, and I think the beginning was a bit of a slow-paced thing that could have been sped up. But for a debut novel and the Jane Eyre adaptation in space, it was an enjoyable read. I enjoyed it. I just wished it was a bit better.
Yeah.
Like I wish there was more care put into the background and an explanation of why they are finally, like, they could die. They could all die before they can return to Earth, and yet everyone's a virgin. Why? How? Please explain how morals evolved. I would really like to know. And there are a lot of ways to explain that. Like, oh my God, Ice Age, we were banished from Earth. Probably religion got this important
population control.
I mean, yes. There are a lot of explanations which never happened. But other than that, it was an interesting read. And I don't mind that sort of adaptations. But again, they kind of need something more than just being a clever twist.
Yeah.
They need the actual background and world building and everything. Not that I've read a lot of them. I've seen a movie that was fun, and I've read this book. Her next sci-fi adaptation is going to be Persuasion. And I don't know. I kind of want to read it because it will be sci-fi again. But I love that book so much.
Yeah.
I'm afraid I'm going to be harsher, and I do not like. I mean, if I end up reading it and not liking it, I'll probably never speak of it, rather than be very harsh in my review. Because other people might completely enjoy it. I don't know. So yeah, I don't mind them. Like you, I don't think they're going to be as famous as the original. Not all of them, but on the other hand, I kind of would like to see more.
Yeah. I know I've got a couple here. on a slightly different vein. So, and I've got this one, which I'll try and get center screen for us. It's a graphic novel version of The Man Who Laughs by Victor Hugo.
Nice.
Which is a bit of a favourite of mine, which I should probably do a quick background and say I saw the musical The Grinning Man in London in January when I was there and absolutely fell in love with it. And I hadn't actually read L'Enquire at that point, which is why I went and found the Project Gutenberg less than wonderful translation. I've since picked up a few film versions around the place, 3 different ones from different periods. And I also found this graphic novel, which it does work quite well because of the style of the story. It does lend itself pretty well to this medium because obviously, I don't know if you know the story, Alina, but Gwynplaine, who's the hero, has had his mouth mutilated as a child, so it's cut into a permanent grin. So that kind of lends itself really well to the cartoony kind of drawing approach to it. Another one I've got here. Now this is, I kind of link these to classics because they're in the vein of the Pride and Prejudice and Zombies, Sense and Sensibility and Sea Monsters thing. But I noticed there's also been a bit of a spat of putting historical figures in bizarre novels too. So we had
that happens a lot.
And Vampire Hunter, and that film was quite amusing too.
I haven't seen that one yet.
If you get a chance, it's worth it. It's enjoyable, like the Zombies one. It's enjoyable fun. Yeah. And there's a Queen Victoria one. I can't remember what she's fighting, but and I have this one, which is a German one, called Sissi die Vampirjägerin, which means Sissi the Vampire Hunter. And so
nice.
Elizabeth of Austria. And in this story, in this version of history, she's a vampire hunter, and Franz Josef and the whole royal family are vampires.
Nice. I've seen cartoons with Sissi. I know Sissi is super popular, and there was a cartoon series that I've seen. And it was kind of an adaptation, and I liked it. I think there are a lot of anime that take these historical figures and do really weird things with it. And if you haven't seen the Fate series, I think you'd actually enjoy that. Okay. Because first they summon, there's a battle between mages that happens periodically. They summon a sort of a champion to fight for them, and it's usually a heroic spirit. One of them is Arthur, King Arthur, who's a woman. Yeah, she's a woman, but she's King Arthur, and her son is her daughter, who's sort of her it's weird, but they have a lot of historical figures that are brought into the modern world, and their perspectives are very different. How this works is that when they're brought into the modern world, they have all the knowledge of everything that's going on, yet they still react in really different ways. It's interesting to see Alexander the Great in the modern world. It's a really cool show to watch because it's cool, but it's also cool from this perspective to see all these really weird takes on historical figures, yet they're super fun. The most recent one is a Netflix original. It's a sort of an alternate universe story in the Fate franchise. It takes place in Sighișoara. Well, no. It takes place in Trifas, who's near Sighișoara, but both cities have artwork inspired by Sighișoara. And we pretend they're two different cities. And every time we were watching it and they were showing Trifas, we were, that's not fucking Trifas, this is Sighișoara. Why do they have to travel to Sighișoara from here? It's like literally 2 steps. And they have Vlad the Impaler, obviously. But there's also Joan d'Arc and yeah, a lot of stuff. But it's fun from that perspective. And oh, I'm sorry. phone call. People don't know I'm streaming at this time. Yeah, it's fun to watch. I think they have the most twisted renditions of historical figures, classical stories, even fairy tales, and they're quite imaginative. I think because they take it more like inspiration than anything else. Sorry.
They really want to talk to you.
Yeah, it's my dad. I will just send him a quick SMS because I don't want to worry him. So
while you do that, while you do that, I'll just maybe introduce perhaps what I think is the probably final aspect of this, which is the adaptations that are not direct adaptations of stories, but more offshoots, side stories told from different point of views and things. So, I mean, I'm thinking about things like Wide Sargasso Sea, which was the retelling of Jane Eyre, but from the point of view of Bertha, the mad woman in the attic, and how she met Rochester and got married to him. And so it's like her story. It's a really good book if you haven't come across it.
Oh, I would like to read that, actually.
Yeah, and there seem to be a few like that. We get, I mean, I've recently read, was that this year or last year? I can't remember now, all the months blow into one, but I read a Jane Eyre retelling from Rochester's point of view, but it kind of encompasses the story of Jane Eyre, but only really in the third part, the final part. And the earlier bits, he's like childhood, his schooling, going to the Caribbean, meeting Bertha and getting married. And then it does do the retelling of Jane Eyre, but only as the final third of the book. So there's quite a few like that. And I don't know if you've seen some of the things like, have you seen the TV series Lost in Austin? Which is great fun. It was on, it's an English one. I can't remember if it's BBC. I think it was ITV, like our other channel. And basically it's set in the modern time. The main girl is a huge fan of Jane Austen. And one day she discovers in her bathroom that there's a special way to a doorway into Pride and Prejudice. And so she ends up going into Pride and Prejudice, and Elizabeth Bennet comes out into our modern times. And they kind of swap.
Oh, nice.
And she's kind of, and the modern girl's kind of stuck there. She can't find the way back. So she has to like cast herself as Elizabeth's friend who's come to visit and hasn't realized that she's gone away traveling. And so she ends up being the one who meets Darcy instead, and various things. So it kind of follows Jane, it kind of follows Pride and Prejudice, but it's like she knows that everything's going wrong and that she's not meant to be falling for Darcy because she needs to get Elizabeth back like pronto before everything goes haywire and all the bits of story are going off and people are marrying the wrong people and she's desperately trying to fix everything. So if you come across that, it's called Lost in Austin, and it's really, really amusing. And then the other one would
like to find that.
And the other one would be the film Austenland, where she goes to the Austen-style theme park, which is a rom-com, and that's a little bit of a looser connection. But I do quite enjoy some of these where they are spin-offs, and they're perhaps taking the tale of characters who are secondary characters in the book or who don't have a voice in the book or in the original, and telling either doing a retelling from their point of view or more often doing a retelling that encompasses information we didn't know about different parts of their lives that aren't covered in the book. Yeah. So I mean, I'm trying to think of some more off the top of my head, but I mean, Wide Sargasso Sea was the one I remember because that's reasonably well known for the Jane Eyre one. But I have read a few, and I do quite enjoy those. And there's, I mean, obviously now that Peter Pan's out of copyright at least in some countries, we've got a slew of Peter Pan retellings and things that have been coming out recently. There's Alice in Wonderland seems really popular as well at the moment. Keep seeing a lot of Alice.
The book series, there's one focusing on the Red Queen of fantasy, from what I know.
Yeah.
I've heard a lot about it, and people seem to enjoy it. I'm trying to remember if I've seen any more recently on BookTube, but no, that's the only one that comes to mind as far as Alice goes. I found it interesting to focus on a character who you wouldn't think would work as a protagonist. They pretty much have their her origin story and why she is the way she is now. So
in a way, it's kind of like the Wicked idea, where you take the Wicked Witch and say who was she before she became the Wicked Witch, and
something like that. And I found that interesting. And I agree with you. These stories that are loosely related but that bring more could be more interesting. And then I think these retellings that are either modern or more in a fantasy or paranormal genre would work too. I just think they need more than just the gimmick. Because honestly, Jane Eyre in space sounds awesome. But then it has to follow through. Like, I mean, if you do something like that in space, you have to take the genre requirements and what people would expect of it. And some will, like, I got over it. I still enjoyed the read, but others won't.
Yeah.
And if you're only appealing to the Jane Eyre fans, then that can be a hit and miss, because they might enjoy it, they might not, because it's so different. I don't know.
Yes.
I think it's a tricky thing to pull off right.
Yeah, I'd agree, and I think that's pretty. If we sort of wrap things up by talking about our own thoughts on doing that, it's probably what puts me off doing it. I think, you know, there's so many stories that I love that I think, oh yeah, I'd love to write my own version of this, but then you kind of think the original's so entrenched in your mind. Are you going to be able to do it justice and make it different enough while, as you say, sticking to the idea, like that original thought, without it just coming across either as just a poor copy or as being so wildly different that people aren't going to enjoy that and they're not going to like the changes?
I think the only ones that I would consider doing retellings of are actually fairy tales or folk tales. And there are a few Romanian ones that are, well, they would work great as dark fantasy retellings, because they're freaking dark. Right? There's a lot of blood and gore for a children's tale.
Yeah.
They were like, I mean, as the original Grimms, they were meant to caution, and they didn't beat around the bush. It was pretty much do what your mom tells you. Otherwise, you'll watch a stranger kill your brothers and cut their heads off. That was the main, or do as your mother tells you, otherwise you'll get shot and die all alone. Eaten by worms. Great stories. I wasn't traumatized at all as a child reading these. Yeah, not at all. Never happened to me. So those I would like to do some retellings of, because some are quite interesting. I remember there's this story of a prince who gets into the hunting grounds by mistake. He steps into the hunting grounds of a sort of a beast, half man, half beast. And in order to stay alive, he's supposed to go bring a princess that is supposed to marry the beast. And he does that, but on the way there, they fall in love. And he still gives the woman, like the young maid, to the half beast. But she kind of saves herself. She kind of makes so much fun of the poor beast that he just dies of rage and embarrassment. He just bursts. And then she marries whoever she wanted to marry, which I think is, oh, cool, nice, empowering story. But then making fun of the not normal character. Oh, he was evil. Okay, maybe then it works. But yeah, there are fun stories and there are really weird, depressing stories, which I think would work great as retellings in modern times, because why not? I mean, like,
I think one of the reasons that the fairy tales and myths also do tend to work better as retellings than the classic novels are because the stories tend to be a lot shorter, a lot simpler. So you've got a lot more scope to work around them and to change things.
And you have more of an archetype for each character than a full-fledged character.
Yeah, whereas it's different trying to take an entire book with set characters and rewrite that. Whereas you've got a bit more scope.
Yeah, we're used to the Disney movies where there's a lot of development because they're like an hour long or 2 hour long movies, but the actual stories are pretty short. And there's not that much. I mean, the characters are unique and interesting, but they're more archetypical than than an individual. Let's say.
Yeah.
They have personality, but then they could be a million people. That's how I see it, because they focus more on the lessons, on the journey, on the classic hero journey, and then it's easier to work with them, I think.
Yeah, you have the key points to hit in the story, and how you do them, there's a lot of room for maneuver. Whereas I think if you're taking something like Jane Eyre or Pride and Prejudice, and you're trying to stay true to the story, then you've kind of got a lot of restrictions on what's going to happen and what characters you have to have appearing when and things like that.
Yeah, and you might end up, I mean, if you want to modernize the character and give them a certain personality, you might have them do something that goes against who they are and might not work that great. So,
Yeah, well, then you get the problem you said with your Jane Eyre about not explaining how the morals are Victorian, essentially.
Yeah.
If you take those characters and put them in modern time.
I mean, I was going to say like, slightly Victorian, but no, it's exactly Victorian morals. Like, that's it. How did we get back there? No explanation. And that would have been fun to explain and to explore, I think. Again, the idea in itself was great. The marketing gimmick of Jane Eyre in space worked. At least it really worked for me, because I like sci-fi and I do like some of the classics. Not all of them, because I mean, I think I would have enjoyed them more if I read them because I wanted to. But it's required reading. You have that sort of slight resentment for them. And if you enjoyed the book, you get over it. If you don't, not so much. Like I wouldn't have chosen to read Madame Bovary ever. Like that woman annoyed me so much. In real life, I would have told her to get over herself and get a life.
That's probably where I had a slight advantage as well, because I had started to read them at just as I was going into high school. So I'd kind of already got appreciation for them outside of school before we started having to do them, which was probably an advantage, because then to me, that's the stuff I was reading at that time anyway. So it didn't feel like a sort of like forced read to me. It was just something I was already reading in that spot.
That happened to me with some of the Romanian authors, because I started reading them way earlier. There's a book that we used to study by Mircea Eliade that's called Maitrey. Everything happens in India. He's a student there, and he falls in love with an Indian girl. A lot of things go wrong. It's loosely based on reality, and the woman in question wrote a sort of the bookish version of a response video.
Right.
Pretty much saying, this is bullshit, it never happened. It was like, this is fiction. I made the story more interesting. The actual story is not that interesting. But it was fascinating because I didn't know a lot about India other than Indian movies. So this was a different take through the eyes of an actual Romanian writer. So I discovered that pre-high school, and then I had to read it again in high school, and I did. And then I read it again later. I think I read the book 3 times or something like that. But some books are better left for later. I think I would have understood more of it later, which I did. I enjoyed it both times, but for different reasons and at different levels. So yeah, that helped. But some books, like Madame Bovary, no, I would have. It's pretty much, if it's the kind of book I would have chosen for myself to read, I enjoyed it. If not, not so much.
Yeah. And how do you find, because I know a lot of people tend to be put off the classics in England because they think, oh, we don't understand them, the language is bizarre or whatever. How do you find that approaching reading a book in English as a second language English speaker?
Bullshit. If I get, I mean, like, I read A Midsummer Night's Dream when I was in the 11th grade. So I was 17. I read it in original English, Shakespearean English. Yeah. I understood about 70 to 80% of it. Like, right from the bat. The rest I kind of got from context.
Yes.
I did have to look up some words. And this was back in the day when you didn't just press click on the word and got the definition. So if I could understand A Midsummer Night's Dream in its original language, then a native English speaker should have no problem with most of the classics, especially those like Jane Austen or Hardy or no, that's just a way to say I know I should read them, but I'm making excuses not to.
There we go. Now, see, I've never had a problem with them, and I've never had a problem with Shakespeare. And I always find it weird when people go, "Oh, but it's hard to understand." It's like, well, to me, it's perfectly normal. You know, you look up the odd word, as you say, if it's a bizarre word that we don't use anymore. But
I think it's an age thing. I think it's an age thing because, God, I feel old now. It's because you're used to a different kind of book. Like you started with a different kind of book that's more descriptive, more introspective, more slow-paced, which is very different from modern literature.
Yes, that's very true.
Very different, but it has its beauty and its charm and lots of reasons to love it, this type of literature, and I think you should experience more of it. I think people should stop limiting themselves. Like I was kind of forced to because of the situation of where I was. We were looking at everyone's classics, but it was great because as a kid I had like Russian fables to grow up with, and French and Italian children's stories, and Turkish fairy tales and folk tales, and the Romanian literature, and then English literature, and it gives you a very different perspective. I think for both modern literature and classics, you shouldn't just be stuck to your mother tongue. Let's put it that way. So yeah, that's bullshit that you can't understand the language. Like, come on. I mean, come on.
And I mean, with something like Shakespeare, I always think, I mean, I'll sit and read Shakespeare, but it always makes much more sense if you hear it as well. Like watching Shakespeare is much more straightforward than sitting there reading it often as well.
Yeah, even though we read it, but you watch the play, it's still great. I still think it's a valuable experience, and you should at least try that and then maybe read it. But yeah, just small disclaimer. I've been studying English since I was 8 years old. So I started in my 2nd grade, and from my 5th grade, so for 8 years of my middle and high school, middle school and high school, I was in intensive English classes. So I had I think I had more English classes in high school than I had Romanian literature and grammar, because those were 5, like 3 literature, 2 grammar for Romanian, and 6 English classes.
Right.
Per week. So 6 hours, let's say, because we had 1-hour classes. So I did work in English for most of my career, because it happened. And so at this point, my vocabulary is at college level from the tests I did.
Yeah.
So just saying, but you know, when I read these books, I was in high school. Let's say I had high school level vocabulary in English. So if you've been to high school, even as a dropout, you have no excuse to say you don't understand the language.
Yeah,
and just my perspective.
A slightly side point, but one thing I really wish was that in England we did foreign languages earlier, because we really, occasionally a primary school might do a little bit of French, but we really don't learn any until we get to high school. So I was age 11, 12 before we even started a foreign language.
I should say that like a couple of years after I started school, they started learning English in the 1st grade, and right now they start at kindergarten level.
Right.
But that's because it's a small
country. You kind of pick stuff up so well at that age.
It's great.
And leaving it till high school, I mean, because I got on with languages, I was fine. Like I did several languages through high school, French and German all the way pretty much, and then picked up a year of Italian. And I now sort of teach myself and try and keep them up as much as I can. But my sisters struggled with languages. And I think you need to start learning them a lot earlier. We've got this opinion in England that everyone will just speak English. And I think
it's because you don't need it. It's because you don't need it. I think in Romania, the number of people speaking foreign languages would decrease drastically if we didn't need it. First of all, it's hard to get a job without a foreign language.
Right.
It's not a menial job. Second of all, nobody speaks Romanian. I mean, you get the odd occurrence when you're just walking the streets of Istanbul and the Turkish guy comes straight at you and talks to you in Romanian. That happens. I mean, you think you're safe somewhere and you swear in Romanian and there are Romanians around you. I've had a lot of friends that experience that. It's fun. But let's face it, we're a small country, not a power, let's say. So we get no choice. If we want to make any headway, we need to learn foreign languages. And I think that applies to everyone, including the French, who like to think that they're better than everyone else because some of them speak English. And they're of the impression that if you go to France and don't speak French, they might as well not reply. To that, I'd say, I'm sorry. I don't want to learn all the languages in the world.
Well, you haven't got time, Alina.
But if they come to Romania, of course, they speak French and they expect you to understand. They rarely switch to English. So I think it's a powerful country idea. Although in Germany, they do learn languages earlier.
They're very good in Germany for language learning too. Yeah.
Holland as well. But yeah, if you go to the actual huge powers like France and the UK and the US, let's not even talk about that. It's very difficult to find people who speak a different language. Then again, let's be fair, there are people, it's hard to find someone who speaks something other than Hungarian in Hungary, for example. It's probably easier to find someone who speaks Romanian there. Yeah, I mean, if you have to learn languages because you've been told this since you were born, that you need foreign languages to get ahead in life, you have a very different perspective. And I'm thankful for that. But on the other hand, if I were born in the US, would I know as many foreign languages as I know now? Not that there are many. I mean, I'm fluent in English and I can do conversational Spanish and French if I have to. I used to be really good in French at some point. I forgot everything. But yeah, I do know a few phrases in a lot of languages and I do understand a lot of languages. Romance languages for the win. Yes. I mean, if you're Romanian, you kind of understand about 60% of certain languages like Spanish and Italian, even some French.
So you've got that link,
especially if you studied Latin, which I did for a long time. So because Latin will help you with stuff that pertains to grammar and catching up on stuff that's not that obvious in Romanian.
Yeah.
So
for those who are just joining us, we're not actually having a discussion about languages. However, however, it does all tie in because we're discussing the classics. And we've been talking earlier about the fact that it is really good, if you can, to read the classics in the original. And I do, as I said, I do prefer, if I can, to read some of the French stuff in French, because I think you do, even if it's a good translation, you do get a really different feel for the story when you're reading it in the original language with that period vocabulary than you do with a translation, which will often kind of modernize the words a little bit. The best translations try and keep that in check, but you do find it. And it is a different experience, I think, of all books, but particularly with classics, I think, where there's such a period sense about them. The original language does really help if you can. I mean, I would learn all the languages if I could, but I'm trying to keep, I love doing it. I love learning languages, and I'd love to learn more. But I mean, I find that now I've moved to Australia, I'm not doing my little trips over to Paris or Prague and that anymore, which was great for just practicing French and Czech and the like. And now I can't do that easily. It's much harder to get that practice in and keep them up. So I've got kind of about 5 or something. What have we got? French, German, Italian, Czech, Danish. And I've been trying to learn some Icelandic, although that's going nowhere because I love it. And it's a fascinating language, but I'm finding it hard to get enough resources and enough opportunities to practice it. So just trying to keep those up is bad enough. I keep thinking I really ought to do some Russian, but it's like, oh, it's a whole new alphabet as well. I don't think I've got the time at the moment. I hear some. I understand some because I've done Czech, so I pick up a few words and I can pick out some key words here and there, but I wouldn't be able to speak any back to anyone.
It's the same with me because I do speak some French and some Spanish, so I can get some Portuguese, which to me is kind of a mix. And I did study Italian at some point on my own, so it makes sense that I would understand a lot of stuff, and because to me some things are similar to Spanish.
Yes.
So I can get some idea of it. But it's a lot of work to add more languages to your skill set. Although I hear that from a point on, it gets extremely easy. Yes. And the more languages you speak, the easier it becomes.
Yeah, and it is those links, as you say, because I mean, I've studied French and Italian. I haven't really studied Spanish. I've got a couple of teach yourself books here, but because I've done the French and Italian, I wouldn't be able to go and speak to someone in Spanish. But if I see it written or if I hear it, I can understand a chunk of it. And the same, like having done Danish, I can pick up a fair bit of Swedish, Norwegian as well, and Dutch from the German. And so you do definitely get an ear for them, and you can see which ones connect to each other, which ones are cousins and things for certain. And that does make it a bit easier. But that's probably why I've not branched into different alphabets so much yet. And I've got a Chinese sister-in-law now, and I keep thinking I really ought to learn some Mandarin, but the thought of trying to learn all the little symbols, I mean, are they called kanji in Chinese, or is that just in Japanese? But you know what I mean, all the little pictorial
I don't know how
representations.
They're called. I think kanji is that there might be taken from, I'm not sure.
That kind of puts me off.
If you want to learn kanji, though, there's a system for that, and you can learn them like the basic set, like a few thousand in a few months.
Okay.
It uses a certain teaching method, and you just learn them without knowing the word in Japanese. You know what they mean in English, but it's a complicated thing. I think my boyfriend is trying it now, but it's very effective.
Okay. So on that note, I think we've probably reached the end of our discussion of classics that disappeared into modern language learning a little while ago.
It made sense. Like if you watch all the stream.
It does tie in. It's not completely random as it may seem if you've suddenly tuned in and are going, what has this got to do with classics? It did have a point connected to that earlier.
At some point it had a point.
But we probably will start to wrap up there. We're going to be back on Alina's channel next month when we are doing, we were going to do horror anyway, but we will be combining that now with the mysteries and thrillers that we missed in August. So it'll be a 3-for-1. Next month
there will be a lot of gushing about Agatha Christie that I can tell you from
it'll be Alina's turn to gush. Mine was this week, so I mean I tend to watch more film and that for mysteries and horror and thriller and that than reading, so you'll probably have a bit more to say than me, but we will be back then. So we'll close off for now, but we look forward to seeing you all again soon. So it's bye from me, and
bye, and we'll see you definitely next time. Bye. I said bye already. I'm sorry.
We're definitely leaving now. Bye, everyone.